Hello and welcome. This is The Masked Arab. In this video, I'll be going through the 7 main reasons why I left Islam. I will try to keep it as short as I can, but we have a lot to get through, so let's get going. Before I start explaining them individually, let me quickly list the 7 reasons that made me realize Islam was just yet another man-made religion. And they are: Number 1. The Quran is not perfect and contains blatant scientific errors. Number 2. The Quran has contradictions as well as grammatical and historical errors. Number 3. The life and actions of Muhammad were not as perfect as I had been led to believe. Number 4. The Quran takes a lot of stories from the Bible that are absurd and totally lacking in historical evidence. Number 5. The pagan origins of belief. Number 6. The concept of divine justice is flawed. And number 7. The convenient timing of certain verses. To keep this video down to a reasonable length, I will only lightly touch on the reasons and not go into too much detail. I may choose to do a full video on some of these points at a later stage. If there's one topic you'd like me to touch on more in particular, let me know in the comments section below. Now, before I start, let me just quickly preempt the usual criticism and accusations from the apologists.
I'm not going to believe what you say because you're just making it up.
I realize you don't trust me, and being skeptical is a good thing, so I'll have my sources in the description below and you can check them for yourself.
Well, anything you say is bound to be out of context.
The Quran explicitly states several times that it's meant to be a clear book. Only on one occasion does it claim that some of its verses can be allegorical, but logically any allegorical verses would have to be specified as such, otherwise the whole book is pointless, as we wouldn't know whether anything that is being said is actually meant.
I hate you, you stinky infidel.
Oh, yeah, I'll give you that one. I keep getting sidetracked and I'm trying to keep it short anyway, so focus, man, focus! Okay, so reason 1. The Quran is not perfect and contains basic scientific errors. We all know, if we have any understanding of our reality, that the universe most likely began as a Big Bang. Now, some Muslim preachers will embarrassingly claim that this is foretold in the Quran 1400 years ago in this verse. It basically says that the earth and heavens were one and then split apart. Well, sorry, but that is nowhere near describing the Big Bang. For starters, Earth formed as a result of the universe coming into existence and could not have existed at the very beginning of the universe. Earth was only formed around 9 billion years after the Big Bang, so it was never there at the moment of the Big Bang. And if it was, the planet would have been incinerated in the face of such heat and force. Moving back to the point of scientific inaccuracy, the Quran repeatedly tells us in the clearest of terms that the Earth was created first before the heavens. Quran verse 229. He it is who created for you all that is in the earth, then turned he to the heaven, and fashioned it as 7 heavens, and he is knower of all things. Chapter 41 verses 9 to 12 also give us the same order, that the earth came before the heavens. The order here is absolutely wrong and irrational, but in line with what a desert Bedouin in the 7th century might have thought, and also generally in line with the teachings of the Torah, which got it wrong too. We can date stars using various techniques like measuring the beryllium content in the star's outer layers, and we have stars that are nearly as old as the universe itself, while we can also measure the Earth's age using isochron dating of lead isotopes and numerous other methods which all give us the same results. Also, looking at the verses in chapter 41, the verses 9 to 12, we find that it takes God at least twice as long to build Earth than it does for him to build everything else in our vast universe. The Sun itself is around 1 million times bigger than Earth in volume. There are billions of stars in just our own galaxy. Then there are billions of galaxies in the observable universe. The fact that it would take God longer to build our tiny planet is telling us the author of the Quran had a very geocentric view and was oblivious to reality and the scale of our planet. Moving on, a recurring topic in the Quran is that of the purpose of stars. We are told that they are in the lowest heaven, so the layer of heaven closest to the earth, and that their purpose is twofold. One is stars were created to be a decoration for the night sky, and the other is that they act as a form of protection for God and the angels, and what's called the High Council or Exalted Assembly in heaven, where God and the angels reside. The stars are pelted at devils trying to listen in to what's being said in the heavens. Now there are two main problems here beside the obvious absurdity and mythical nature of this story. The first is that shooting stars are not actually stars but meteors. And the second is these meteors burn in the layer of the atmosphere just above Earth called the mesosphere. That's between 50 and 85 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, and hardly anywhere near heaven if it's alleged to be outside the edge of the universe. It's clearly an ancient legend that tries to explain why they were shooting stars to primitive people who didn't understand the world around us. Now the list of these scientific errors is long, but I need to move on. Reason number 2. The Quran has contradictions as well as grammatical and historical errors. I initially believed the Quran didn't contain any serious contradictions, but I can now see that's clearly not the case. I've already mentioned 2 verses, and if you looked closely enough, you'll see that they contain a contradiction, but you might not have noticed, so let me quickly show you what it was. In chapter 21, verse 30, it says the earth and the heavens were together and then separated, while chapter 41, verse 11, says the earth and heavens were separate and then joined. Elsewhere, according to Islamic history, the first major battle the Muslims fought against the pagan Arabs were at the wells of Badr, around 130 kilometers southwest of Medina, not too far from the Red Sea. Muslims claimed their army defeated a far larger army, and Muhammad said this was due to a number of angels who came down to help them in battle. But how many angels helped the Muslims win the Battle of Badr? If we look at Surah Al-Anfal verse 9, it's 1,000. Whereas Surah Al-Imran verses 123 to 124 are clear that 3,000 angels helped the Muslims at Badr. Some apologists claim that the 3,000 angels were sent at the next battle of Uhud, but that makes no sense since the verses are clearly talking about Badr. It mentions the battle by name, and the Muslims also lost the Battle of Uhud, so 3 times as many angels didn't really help. Now, how long is Judgment Day? Well, it's either 50,000 years by our count or 1,000 years by our count. It depends really on which verse you're reading. Some apologists claim its duration changes depending on how good or bad you are, but nothing suggests that in the text of the Quran, and it seems to be a poor attempt at making sense of the discrepancy. I won't get into grammatical errors here as this video is in the English language, but a blaring historical error comes in the description of Jesus' mother Mary. The author of the Quran clearly mixes up the well-known Mary with a Miriam who allegedly lived hundreds of years before her. Miriam is mentioned in the Bible as a sister of Aaron and Moses. The book of Exodus, chapter 15, verse 20, clearly says that Miriam is the sister of Aaron. She's also mentioned as the daughter of Amram, and this is mentioned in 1 Chronicles 6:3. Now the Quran mentions the Virgin Mary with exactly the same relations as Miriam. That is just way too much of a coincidence and extremely strong evidence that the Quran's author made an error after mistaking Mary and Miriam as the same person. We see in Surah At-Tahrim, which is chapter 66, verse 12, Mary is referred to as the daughter of Imran, whilst in Surah Maryam, chapter 19, verse 28, she's referred to as a sister of Aaron. The author has clearly mistaken Miriam for Mary in the Bible and presented them as the same person in the Quran. On to reason 3, the life and actions of Muhammad. Now, before I'm accused of cherry-picking on this, I will say I am aware that he did do some good things like encouraging charity giving to the poor, for instance, and forbidding backbiting. But there is no doubt, if you read the Quran, Hadiths, and his Seerah, which is his biography, that the man was brutal to say the least and nowhere near the absolute model of perfection I was taught he was as a Muslim. The most well-known controversy involving him was probably his marriage to a 6-year-old girl before consummating the marriage at 9. Apologists in this generation know this stands against their values and often try to wriggle out of it by changing the age of Aisha based on indirect calculations emanating from much weaker hadiths, while others will claim girls mature faster in hot climates. But I'm not really here to cite Aisha's marriage and instead will focus on other aspects. Muhammad was a violent man who led at least 30 raids against his opponents and encouraged banditry against trade caravans where his men looted goods and killed traveling merchants. The attacks were unprovoked the vast majority of the time. In some raids, Muslims attacked villages, killing the men and enslaving women and children. In one instance at the Battle of Autas, Muslims captured women as sex slaves and felt it was immoral to have sex with them as they were already married. So then Muhammad reveals a Quranic verse to tell them that having sex with married women is banned, with the exception if that married woman is actually your slave. Apologetics have a difficult time trying to defend this verse, as it's clear in the Quran and it's across pretty much all Islamic sources, Sunni and Shia. This is found in Surah An-Nisa, which is chapter 4, and verses 23 and 24. At the beginning of verse 24, we see it says, "Also prohibited are women already married, except those whom your right hands possess." So we can clearly see that Muhammad and the Quran encouraged Muslim soldiers to rape their female captives, even if they were married. Muhammad was also obsessed with the Jews. He initially felt he could convince them to join him and accept his prophethood, but they kept insisting for miracles that he couldn't provide. So he became increasingly frustrated with them and began to come up with reasons to attack them, banish them, and take over their wealth and property. He banished a couple of Jewish tribes from Medina, but then the third and final tribe weren't as fortunate. The Banu Qurayza had been accused of not doing enough to support Muhammad in his battles, and he besieged their fortress for 25 days with no food or water allowed in before they were forced to surrender. Now, cutting food and water from a village may seem inhumane, but the Quran here praises the Muslims for casting terror in their hearts. In chapter 33, verse 26, we see it says, "And those of the people of the book who aided them, Allah did take them down from their strongholds and cast terror into their hearts. Some ye slew, and some you made prisoners." As the Jews sat awaiting their punishment, some Muslims from the Aus tribe begged Muhammad to be lenient in his sentence, but he appointed a man known for his contempt towards the Bani Qurayza to issue a sentence against them. This man, Sa'ad bin Mu'adh, ordered that all men and boys who have reached puberty are beheaded. They checked for pubic hair growth to determine who was to die. The women and children were to be enslaved by the Muslims and their property taken by Muslims. Muhammad even took a female slave called Rayhana on that day after murdering all the men of her tribe. One woman was also beheaded after she had allegedly insulted Muhammad. Estimates of people beheaded that day range from 600 to 900 people. I ask Muslims here to be honest with themselves. If they were on the receiving end of such barbarity, would they give the same excuses that they give now for this brutal massacre? Another example of extreme violence endorsed by Muhammad is given as the context behind verse 533. If we read the verse, it says, "The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive with might and main for mischief through the land is execution or crucifixion or the cutting off of hands and feet from opposite sides or exile from the land. That is their disgrace in this world, and a heavy punishment is theirs in the hereafter." Now, many Muslims will always claim that this is out of context and it obviously means something else. So let's just take a look at the context. Let's see why this particular verse came down into the Quran. Now, pay attention here, as this pretty much single-handedly proves that Muhammad himself was not a man of peace. One day, a group of people from Ukal and Urayna approached Muhammad and asked for help. He sent one of his companions with them, along with camels, and told them that they could drink camel milk and urine on their journey. Once they were far enough from Muhammad, the people killed the companion and stole the camels. However, Muhammad sent out for them and captured them. Then he personally committed one of the worst acts of violence imaginable. He chopped off their hands and feet, then gouged their eyes out before leaving them there to die in the desert a slow and painful death. This is absolutely outrageous and flies in the face of swift justice. I'm not saying murderers shouldn't be executed, but it was very arbitrary, with no attempt to differentiate between the person who killed the companion directly with his hands and the others who were with him, potentially accomplices. Why gouge out eyes and leave them to suffer slowly before dying? This story appears in many Islamic sources. I will link the main source in the description below. Reason number 4. The Quran takes many absurd and historically inaccurate stories from the Bible. For starters, there is no geological evidence around for a global flood like Noah's, even though there should be plenty of evidence for such a flood if it really happened. No historical evidence whatsoever that Jews were enslaved in Egypt at any time. No archaeological proof suggests that they were lost in the desert for 40 years. Yet elements of this story appear quite a lot in the Quran. For instance, Noah's Ark has now been uncovered as a forgery of earlier flood myths. Here on YouTube, 43 Ali has a brilliant video on this that is well sourced and linked in the description below. Whilst you're there, I would highly recommend watching his video on the evolution of Jesus through the New Testament, tracing how his story starts off basic and simple and evolves into something that is larger than life generations after the alleged death of Jesus. There's a general misconception that Islam claims the previous scriptures like the Bible were corrupted. The Quran actually says Muhammad confirms what was sent before him and confirms the scriptures with the Jews and Christians during his time. Let's take a look now at Jacob. He is also known by the name Israel in both the Bible and the Quran. Let's take a look at where he gets this name. In Genesis 32, we are told Jacob physically wrestles with God during the night until dawn, Then God tried to escape Jacob's grip, but it was too strong, and Jacob said he wouldn't let him go unless he blessed him. God then blesses him and renames him Israel, which in Hebrew means he who prevails over God. Why on earth would the Quran use the name Israel to describe Jacob if this is the name's origin in the Bible? It either means Muhammad endorses the story or wasn't aware of the meaning of this name. Another bizarre story that is copied from the Bible is the story of Lot, where he hosts two angels in his home, and a homosexual mob demand Lot hand them over to be raped. Lot, instead, being the good man he is, offers his two virgin daughters for the mob to rape instead. Luckily for the girls, the homosexual mob declined Lot's insane offer. This is mentioned in Genesis 19, but it's also mentioned twice in the Quran. Firstly in Surah Hud, chapter 11, verse 78, and also in Surah Al-Hijr, chapter 15, verse 71. Apologists here will claim that Lot offered his virgin daughters in marriage, but none of the scriptures say that. That's not a very good excuse either, as he knows they're gay rapists, not exactly people you'd want to give your girls to in marriage for a number of reasons. Besides, he only has two girls, and it's a large crowd. To quell the crowd's lust, the girls had to be shared, and not married to just one or two individuals from the crowd. Reason number 5. The pagan origins of belief. Islam seems to take a lot of what pagans used to believe. Let's remember that the Sumerian religion was likely the first organized religion in the region and possibly the entire world. They believed in the concept of 7 heavens and 7 earths. They had a superstition with the number 7 because of what they observed about the night sky, where 7 objects, namely the sun, moon, and 5 inner planets of the solar system, all moved independently and were not fixed like the stars appear to be. Surah At-Talaq, chapter 65, verse 12 reads, Allah is He who created 7 firmaments, and of the earth a similar number. Now, we obviously know now that there aren't 7 earths or 7 heavens, but even if someone claims we might not know the meaning, isn't it dubious to say the least that this idea was proposed well before the Quran stated it? I mean, it was an incorrectly held common belief long before the 7th century that there were 7 heavens, and that's shown when we see a verse like this. Surah Nuh, chapter 71, verse 15. Do you not see how Allah has created the 7 heavens, one above the other? We find this verse is taking the fact that there are 7 heavens as a given. When it says, do you not see this? Instead of saying something like, God created 7 heavens, but you can only see one of them, and you can't see the others however far you look. Let's not forget that Aristotle in ancient Greece also championed a very similar idea of solid layers above earth. Is it just a coincidence? It's clearly false, and borrowed by Muhammad to try and explain the cosmos. The most respected Sunni exegesis, Tafsir ibn Kathir, clearly claims the 7 layers are the sun, moon, and 5 inner planets in his interpretation of this verse. The same idea as Aristotle and the Sumerians, which has long since shown to be inaccurate. Another typical paganistic ritual is animal sacrifice to the gods. If Allah is so different from these other gods, why does He accept animal sacrifices? There are endless references to animal sacrifices in the Bible, but the Quran also has a couple of occasions when animal sacrifices to God is mentioned. The first instance is found in the largest chapter in the Quran, called the cow, after the yellow cow the Jews are ordered to slaughter as a sacrifice to God. This appears in chapter 2, verse 67. Another example of this paganistic ritual being practiced by this god is in the story of Cain and Abel, when God accepts the animal sacrifice of Abel and not the vegetation offered by Cain. This leads Cain to kill Abel out of jealousy. The exegesis on this verse is pretty universal that fire came down from the heavens to consume the livestock offered by Abel. Even the concept of Judgment Day and the afterlife seems borrowed from the pagans. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, had souls being judged by a god on a set of scales before determining whether they go to a fiery hell or forever abode in the beautiful gardens of heaven. Religious studies academics tell us these beliefs were held way before the advent of monotheism. We see here the reference to scales is similar to the Quran, and the idea of heaven and hell is not too far off either. So, 5 reasons gone, only 2 to go. I hope you're still tuned in and awake. Reason number 6 that I'm no longer a Muslim is the concept of divine justice is flawed. When you have a God who vows to place you in eternal hellfire if you simply don't believe in His existence, that in itself is not very just, given He created you with a mind that used rational reasoning to reach a conclusion based on evidence you have. It's also grossly unfair that some people in the past witnessed miracles firsthand, and in this day and age we no longer see them. But what makes it worse is that in the Quran, God categorically states time and time again that guidance to his message is something that he controls and is not really a matter of free will. Chapter 2 verse 10 says, "In their hearts is a disease, and Allah has increased their disease." Why is he increasing this disease? A few verses later, we see that Allah mocks the unbelievers and leaves them to wander off blindly. In chapter 4 verse 88, the Quran is very clear. It says, "Do you wish to guide him who Allah has caused to err? And whomsoever Allah causes to err, you shall by no means find a way for him." Notice the language here. Allah is causing people to err. Allah is the cause of people erring. In chapter 16 verse 93, he causes err to whom he pleases and guides whom he pleases. So it's really down to him. It's not a matter of free will. These and plenty of other verses are clearly stating that it is God's will and not ours over who receives guidance and who is misguided. But for some reason, we are all accountable for his decisions on leaving us out of his pool of followers. Another unjust concept is the fact that the Quran states numerous times that God had favored the Israelites over other people. What kind of universal God is this? Why would he send these people so many messengers and prophets and give them land and help them in battle? This only becomes clear when you look at the history of this God and his origins as a local God and not as the universal God of monotheism, which he later evolves into according to detailed study of scriptures. Another example of injustice can be found in chapter 2 verse 178. It reads, "Retaliation is prescribed for you in the matter of the murdered, the free man for the free man, and the slave for the slave, and the female for the female." Now, this verse isn't entirely clear from its literal reading, and we need to go and look at the context in which this verse was revealing. So let's look this up in Asbab al-Nuzul by al-Wahidi and see why this verse was revealed. Let's see, here it says, fighting took place between two Arab tribes. One Arab tribe had more power than the other, and therefore they said, "For every slave of ours that you kill, we will kill a free man of yours, and for every woman of ours, a man of yours." And then this verse was revealed. So looking at the context of Revelation, we can see that God has prescribed the barbaric practice of vengeful tribal retaliation, where if someone from tribe A kills a woman from tribe B cannot kill anyone in tribe A other than a woman in retaliation, presumably because a woman and men have varying value. What kind of divine justice is this? Innocents are killed in retaliation, and Muslim clerics tell us this system is a perfect solution for mankind. Moving on to another point of flawed justice. It just doesn't seem like it's a fair test. I mean, people of religion will tell you that everything is a test, and it's a test whether you're going to believe or not. And if you don't believe, you fail the test and you will be punished in the hereafter. So, how fair is this? Why does a Muslim have such a massive head start on so many of us? Given that less than 1% of the world's population change their religion, this doesn't seem to be a very fair criteria. If the majority of people are unable to find the right belief using their brain, then I'm afraid God is being irrational in his judgment, as humans are clearly not capable of seeing the so-called truth of this message very easily. It's like trying to teach a class of 5-year-olds quantum mechanics, and then burning them in an eternity of hell if they don't understand it. Just to put things in context, this God of Islam forbids someone to eat pork or listen to music, but allows slavery, the rape of concubines, and the marriage of young girls. It really seems that his moral compass is all over the place. Finally, on to the last reason why I left Islam. Number 7, convenient timing of verses. Muhammad had many instances of when his revelations were convenient for him on a personal level, which undoubtedly leads skeptics to question why God would be revealing verses in the Quran that have nothing to do with the message of Islam. In Surah At-Tahrim, which is chapter 66 verse 1, we see that Muhammad is told he shouldn't be forbidding things which have been made lawful for him. So the background to this story is that Muhammad has sex with his slave Mary the Copt at Hafsa's house. When Hafsa walks in and catches him, he urges Hafsa not to tell one of his other wives, Aisha, because he made a promise to her that he wouldn't sleep with Mary. Hafsa tells Aisha anyway, and news spreads. There is a breakdown in the relationship of Muhammad and his wives, and after Muhammad vows not to sleep again with Mary, God reveals verses rebuking his wives and urging Muhammad to not ban himself from Mary. In Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 37, the background to this is that Muhammad was attracted to his cousin, Zainab bint Jahash, who was one of the most beautiful women in Quraysh at the time. But she was married to his adopted son, Zayd. When Zainab knew of Muhammad's attraction, she wanted to ditch Zayd and marry Muhammad, who had a much higher social status. When Zainab and Zayd divorced to allow for Muhammad to marry her, people frowned on the move as they considered Zainab to be his former daughter-in-law. But Muhammad gets a revelation from God ordering him to marry Zainab and not fear what people say. The reason given why he needs to marry Zainab is so that other Muslims will know that marrying your adopted son's ex-wife is okay in God's eyes. Staying in chapter 33, verse 50, we see this verse, which basically gives Muhammad an exception to the rule of having a maximum of 4 wives. He is told in this verse he can take as many wives as he wants. Just 3 verses later, we have another convenient verse. Here, the background to this is that Muhammad is annoyed at why guests at his home are overstaying their welcome. One of the guests is Talha bin Ubaidullah, who makes his intentions clear that he plans to marry Aisha after Muhammad's death. Muhammad is frustrated with this man, but is too shy to tell him to leave. So God reveals a verse to tell these people to leave Muhammad's house, and he also throws in the order that no one will ever marry any of Muhammad's wives after he dies. Muhammad once called for polytheism and recognized 3 female deities as daughters of Allah. This delighted his pagan opponents, but soon after Muhammad said he was told by Gabriel that he never gave him these polytheistic verses, and he gave him other verses to recite in their place. People became suspicious of Muhammad's claim to prophecy as a result, and God sends him another verse, this time in chapter 22, verse 52, saying that Satan had cast those words on his tongue, and that this had occurred with many of the previous prophets too. That just seems too convenient. So on that note, this video ends. Please help spread my work to Muslims or non-Muslims alike, who may be interested to hear the arguments I'm putting forward here. If you are a Muslim watching this video, please keep an open mind and check the sources I have left for you in the description box, so you can verify for yourself what I have presented in this video. Please like and share this video with as many people as you can, and please subscribe too. I will try my best to keep the videos coming your way. If you can afford to, please also support my work on Patreon. The link is in the description below. And follow me on Twitter, Google+, and Facebook. Until next time, adios.